Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, well, those right-wing Christian fundamentalists have been at it again against another Naga Kirtan in New Zealand. And yes, once again, it features white people looking rather silly doing the haka. And yesterday marked yet another Shaheed anniversary. Again, a heroic Sikh weapon of vengeance, this time against the British 115 years ago, reveals his dignity and courage in his final letter to the Sangat. We have the amazing translation of that very letter. There's a call to rip down the Indian tricolour outside Indian high commissions right across the world on the 26th of January, Republic Day. But a note of caution for those thinking about that. And after yesterday's revelation that the US is starting to use the Khalistan issue as leverage against India, we'll reveal how India's intelligence agencies, that's the NIA and RAW, are restructuring their operations in North America to counter this pressure from the US administration. All this and more on today's show, and of course at the end of the show we'll take a look at loads of great comments, so do stay tuned for that. Right, let's get underway. And yes, here we go again. We're back to New Zealand. Now, unfortunately, of course, yes, the story came out yesterday that once again, a second Naga Kirtan has been disrupted by these Christian fundamentalists. And it seems a little more deliberately targeted this time. There seems to be a little bit more of a sinister subtext going on. Now, It was actually apparently a very happy, very peaceful event, like all Naga Kirtans tend to be. And you can see this is actually a tweet from a local MP, or a Facebook post from a local MP, Jan Tinetti. I think she's a Labour MP. I don't know much about Kiwi politics. I'm sure you guys down there obviously know a huge amount more than I do. But basically, it just gives an idea. It gives a bit of context to sort of how peaceful, how public, how celebratory this Naga Kirtan is. Even she sort of posted up and said it was a real privilege to join our Sikh Wanau at this year's Turanga Sikh Parade in Turanga. This is a vibrant celebration of faith, unity and service. The values of equality, humility, selfless service, savour, of course, are values that resonate deeply across Aotearoa. Oh, dear me. This is why I can't live in New Zealand. I can't even pronounce any of your place names. Anyway, she continues to say, we see them come to life every day through the incredible contributions of our Sikh community, feeding those in need, volunteering and supporting neighbours with generosity and compassion. There you go. So, of course, she totally understands the whole values of Sikh and the contribution that the community have made down there. And again, you know, it sets the context of how lovely and celebratory and peaceful this Naga Kirtan was. And then along come these idiots, these Christian fundamentalists, driven by a guy called Tamaki, and I'll talk more about him in a moment. And as you can see, and pasted up across social media, all sorts of pictures and memes and stuff about this. And this one here, it says, the ugly face of anti-Sikh hate in New Zealand was on display as the Christian Maori extremist cult. And that key word there is cult. This does seem to be a form of cult that seems to sort of congregated together. True Patriots, they're called, disrupted the second Sikh event in 3 weeks. Now, this leader, Brian Tamaki, earns a substantial payout from social media for his videos of such incidents. Yes, this guy, Brian Tamaki, and I think I'm going to do a separate report on this guy, Brian Tamaki, because a lot of this came in overnight by virtue of the time differences. And I haven't actually had time to sort of look through this. There's a lot of material, a lot of quite concerning material on this that I think justifies a whole article in itself. And maybe tomorrow I'll look more closely at this guy, Brian Tamaki, because I read some of his posts and it gives an idea of just what's going on behind the scenes. It actually gives an insight into what he represents. And it is actually quite concerning. And it really is. I think the word cult is very, very appropriate here. But anyway, we'll come on to that. But yes, of course, he is on social media, and as this post sort of says, he is making a lot of money out of this because, of course, views, engagement, likes, whatever, is money in sufficient numbers. And he referenced India's Narendra Modi regarding why his group targets Sikh terrorists. And, of course, the Khalistan issue comes up, unsurprisingly, once again. And also, more concerningly, this is a picture of Brian Tamaki on the right. He was invited by Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is this right-wing figure here in the UK. Now, again, very divisive figure. He's actually, ironically, Tommy Robinson is supposedly a friend of the Sikh community. He speaks very highly of the Sikh community here in the UK because he recognises how contributory and how positive and how powerful the Sikh community is, and more importantly, is how integrated they are in British society, and the fact that they represent British values in such a powerful force here in the UK, where they've integrated so successfully. And yet, unfortunately, sadly, he is aligned with all right-wing forces around the world, because essentially he sits on the right wing. And this is this paradox that Tommy Robinson represents, because he is now aligning. Yeah, he supports the Sikh community, but he's also aligning with right-wing extremists. We know he's been seduced by the right wing of India to try and present the right wing extremist views of Hindutva, and particularly the anti-Khalistani stance. But here he is, unsurprisingly, aligning with Brian Tamaki, because Robinson invited Tamaki to speak at the rally in London last year. And it says here, seems mainly focused on targeting the 1% New Zealand Sikh population amid a wider anti-immigrant movement that he leads. Yeah, so basically there does seem to be, this isn't just a general blanket anti-immigration stance now that this Brian Tamaki is holding. It seems to be a little bit more targeted. And again, here's just another picture from social media. But this is from Tamaki's own social media stream. Jesus, Sikh Naga Kirtan faces another disturbance attempt in New Zealand, sparks outrage. So this isn't one of Tamaki's, this is another one that came from somebody else's feed. But what I do want to show you, this is, in fact, before I come on to Brian Tamaki's post, I want to show you a video. This is actually the video that was posted up of this Taranga event from Brian Tamaki's own web feed. And this makes quite concerning watching. Have a look at this. I want you to particularly pay attention to the theme, the senses that are assaulted in this video. The aggression, the anger, even the music. Listen to the music. Do you know what this video reminds me of when I see those white guys chanting like that, and they're chanting, Jesus, Jesus? It reminds me of a Nazi parade. It genuinely, my first instinct when I saw this, it reminded me of a Nazi parade. Ironically, he's showing here actually this is wonderful footage. If I remove the aggressive music, look at this. This is actually how wonderful this Naga Kirtan is. Look, peaceful, happy Sikhs celebrating the Naga Kirtan, contrast with the angry mobs. And again, you remove the soundtrack and you actually see Sikhs actually happy, smiling. They've all got smiles on their faces. The celebration. Contrast that with the white guys looking like Hitler Youth, I have to say. They look like Nazis. Happy faces, smiles. Look at the smiles of the Sikhs. There you go. Contrast that with the white guys, the aggressive, almost Nazi-esque faces. A wonderful celebration of the Kirpans. Notice all the smiles again. And again, you remove the sensational music, and it's actually, now you look at the pictures, it's a wonderful video, the celebration of the Naga Kirtan. This is New Zealand, not India. All right, Nazi thugs. I mean, so that gives you a clue. And as I say, you look at those guys, look at their faces. These are white guys doing the haka, which in itself is just ironically stupid. The appropriation of Maori culture to dance the haka. But other than that aside, These guys are a cult. These guys are dangerous. And and the fact that they're even chanting Jesus. I come from a Christian background, and not that I would dare speak on behalf of Jesus' name, but I dare say if Jesus is sitting up there watching these guys, he's probably cringing in embarrassment and shame. You don't shout Jesus, Jesus as if you're shouting Hitler or something. Some idol is basically, it's extremist idol worship. And again, it just flies in the face of any normal morality, human morality, that these guys are supposedly representing a religion. Religions are supposed to express the goodness of humanity, goodness towards your fellow human being. This isn't any form of religion. This is an extremist cult. Again, this is superiority. And when you use that term superiority, it implies Aryan superiority, white superiority. Again, all this dilutes down into, or concentrates and focuses, funnels down into one simple concept: white supremacy, Aryan supremacy. This reflects, ironically, the same Hindutva idea. Obviously not the white faces, but the same Hindutva superiority, which again aligns beautifully with Nazi cultism, this whole cult of Nazism. We are a superior genetic race. And again, you just look at this, and as a white guy, I'm actually thoroughly embarrassed and ashamed about this. And actually, there is that guy there. He does look a bit like a Maori. But it's weird, isn't it? And again, I just find it deeply concerning that these guys are actually even allowed to be out on the public street. But freedom of expression, there you go. But ultimately, as I say, that video gives you a clue of just basically what we're up against. And it is quite concerning. And as I say, I'm going to do a bit more on Brian Tamaki, maybe another day, maybe tomorrow. But I do want to show you, this is the post he actually posted up. And again, to get a flavour of what this guy's like. He says, "What the hell? Swords, daggers? Not long ago, these are our streets, Kiwi streets." Yeah, they're also the Sikh streets, but that seems to bypass him because they're just as much immigrant as you are, mate. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Not long ago, Sikhs were involved in a slashing sword fight inside their Turanga temple. Today, we're seeing swords and daggers openly paraded through Turanga streets. How ridiculous. Let that sink in. This isn't a peaceful religion. Okay, I'll come back to that point. If the gangs or Maori PI walk the streets carrying blades, police will shut it down instantly. But when it's labelled culture or religion, the rules suddenly don't apply. Weapons don't belong on our streets. Foreign religions don't belong on our streets. Keep New Zealand, New Zealand. Okay, I mean, I could spend 20 minutes just picking apart every single line of that. It's ridiculous. Obviously, there's all sorts of ridiculous elements to that. I mean, the fact, they're carrying kirpans. That is their religious symbol, symbol of their faith. But they're not seen, actually I was going to say they're not seen as weapons, ironically they are, but the whole point, the difference here is who is wielding it. A hammer is a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands, but a hammer is also a useful tool, or a hammer can be used in many contexts. And it's the same with the kirpan. The kirpan is there as a religious symbol. It is not there as a weapon to be used say randomly in the street. I've got to be careful what I say here, because of course it essentially is a weapon. It represents a sword. It has huge symbolic meaning. And ultimately, and again, it's all about the martial pride, the military pride of the Sikh faith, the Sikh people. So it does actually represent that. He's right in the sense it is a weapon. But what sadly, what his tiny brain really struggles to come to terms with is actually what it represents. It is a symbol of faith and religion. It is, on the whole, Sikh is again, I'm going to use my word carefully here. It is a peaceful religion. It is on the face of it, but again, it carries with it this huge weight, this huge gravitas of its history and culture. And that history is a huge pride, is a huge military pride. The military capability, success in wars and battles, that is essentially what it represents. So it's not entirely peaceful, but what it is, again, there's a nuance here that I think these people fail to understand. The nuance is that in the right hands, these weapons are both a sign of peace, but also a sign of war, a sign of the war against oppression, this war against persecution. That is what the kirpan essentially represents, and I'm sure my audience will correct me if I'm wrong in that. But ultimately, my understanding is the kirpan represents a proud military history, but a history that is based around the simple moral premise of fighting against oppression, fighting against persecution, fighting against injustice, all these things that the Sikh religion stands for, and the kirpan is the weapon of choice, the tool to fight against those evil things. That is unfortunately what this guy cannot understand. And again, there's the whole immigration thing. Keep New Zealand, New Zealand. Well, I'm going to hate to say it, mate. The Maoris are the only people who actually probably have the right to say, keep New Zealand, New Zealand, because they are indigenous. And actually, again, I don't know my history of New Zealand. I'm sure you guys can correct me on this. But I think even the Maoris might not be indigenous. I think they actually came from the Pacific Islands. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Essentially, you're all immigrants. You cannot stand, the white guys certainly can't stand there and demand that Sikhs get out of New Zealand for all the reasons that we've talked about ad infinitum in the past. But ultimately, this is, and the fact that they're shouting Jesus, 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 again, it's all about cultism, it's all about racial superiority. That doesn't belong. But the real concern here is there does seem to be a running pattern whereby it seems to be increasingly targeting the Sikh community. And particularly the word Khalistan does seem to be entering the equation. So one then does wonder, who's driving this? What is driving this? Is it just Brian Tamaki? Clearly, there's something behind the scenes going on. One wonders if Hindutva now are aligning with Brian Tamaki to target specifically. And the fact that 2 Naga Kirtans now in 3 weeks have been targeted implies this isn't just a random attack on immigrants, whatever their background. This is specifically targeted against the Sikh community. The question is why? Good question. Anyway, so we'll leave it at that. As I say, I'll hopefully cover Brian Tamaki in more detail on another day, maybe tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Okay, let's move on. And Shaheeds again. Yes, here we go again. Sadly, it's almost every day we have to celebrate these sad, well, I say sad demises. They're not sad demises. To actually do it correctly, we're celebrating the heroic demise of these Shaheeds. There's a huge difference. And again, that's the fundamental difference is Shaheeds, as we said yesterday, and in fact throughout December, these Shaheeds, when they meet their end, they always meet their end with courage and with dignity, and it's always the common theme. And again, this is part of a fundamental tenet of Sikhi, is that death is not the end. Death is just the recycling, is that we come back into another life to express our Sikhi faith once again, as every Shaheed who meets their end says so. Don't worry, don't mourn for me. And this is why mourning is not a part, or should not be a part, of a Sikhi celebration of death. It is a celebration of life, and a celebration knowing that that person is going to return and to carry on their lives and carry on their dedication to Sikh principles, etc., etc. So Shaheed Mata Bhai Mewa Singh, this gentleman, back in 1515. He was celebrated yesterday actually. It was the anniversary of his execution. He was hanged. And he was an activist who was hanged on the 11th of January in 1915, beg your pardon, in Canada, in New Westminster. He was hanged for assassinating a British spy master who facilitated colonial racist oppression, particularly against the Sikh people. And it did actually lead to at least 2 Sikh deaths in Vancouver. So basically, he was an instrument of vengeance against this guy, this British guy. And this is quite a common theme of many of the Sikhs who were executed in the 20th century were done so for wreaking revenge for essentially aggression and attacks against the Sikh people. These were acts of aggression. Vengeance is a huge common theme amongst the Sikh faith. In other words, don't cross the Sikh people, because they don't forget. They will always seek vengeance, and they are prepared to die for that vengeance, as indeed was Bhai Mewa Singh. And there have been recent attempts by anti-Sikh groups to try to demonise this guy and demonise the incident. And despite that, Bhai Mewa Singh's act remains as a revered story of essentially Sikh resistance and vengeance. And it's apparently it was depicted in quite a famous film last year called Guru Nanak Jahaz. Unfortunately, I've not seen that. It was in Punjabi. If you've seen that film, let me know in the comments. Let me know your thoughts about that film. But on January the 9th, 1915, just 2 days before his execution, Bhai Mewa Singh wrote a letter to the community in Stockton with the help of community researchers and archivists in the community there. The letter has been it's been digitised, and in fact you can see the front page of the letter. That's obviously the address. This is the original letter that he wrote back in 1915, and there it is in Punjabi. And I'm going to translate what this it has actually been interpreted properly for the first time. And I want to just read for those of you who can't read Punjabi, and it is actually very small on the screen anyway. So I'll quickly skim through basically what it says. It says, Ik Onkar, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh. To the Khalsa Dewan Stockton salutation. Mewa Singh, the servant of all nations. This word servant crops up throughout this letter. He sees himself as a servant of both God, Waheguru, but also of the Sikh people. And the servant of all nations. Offers the Sikh sect this letter because I'm desirous of leaving to you and your posterity this letter in remembrance to myself. And don't forget, this is written over 100 years ago, so the language is quite sort of slightly different. And of course, it's been translated as well. I am destined to ascend to heaven. For this reason, your servant is sending the letter to see the Sangat. I'm in jail. Mit Singh told me that a telegram had come from Stockton to find out the date of my execution because it will be necessary to read this concluding chapter of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And hearing this, I was so happy. And he does actually say so happy. Again, the theme of this letter isn't sad that I'm facing my execution. It's quite the opposite. It's actually, I'm really happy. And he uses this word happy. I'm so happy and thankful. It's again, is almost on a high, on a religious high, facing his end. And he says again, I was so happy that the body of this lowly person, which comes and goes, is again a sacrifice. And again, that whole concept of this recycling of each of us, this body, this lowly person, as he calls himself, he describes himself as a lowly person. Don't matter, it comes and goes, but it's a sacrifice. And this community has remembered this lowly being. I leave this earth thanking you 1,000 times. It's impossible to write my thanks, they're so great. And then he actually says, thank you. So he says it lots of times. Your servant's pen can't write it enough. Your servant is so happy to be leaving to the afterlife in this way. And again, he says, so happy. The Guru says, generous, humble beings are above both birth and death. All of the brothers should gather and read the Shabad. Nanak Ji says, this is all your greatness. No one even knows my name. And all the brothers should gather and shout happy slogans of victory. Your servant urges you not to be unhappy in any way. Your servant doesn't fear death in any way. If anyone makes dramatic cries at my death, they're no friends of mine. Please accept my last salutation to Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh as I leave. And I please say it loudly with me, your servant is urging you at the end, shout slogans of victory. I say Fateh to you with both hands clasped. Please call a big gathering and read this letter to all. I urge you. And to the brother, your servant, has left his property. They're instructed to put all my money to uplifting others. In other words, all my belongings go to help the Sangat. Guru Sahib Ji says, the wealth which you chase after in all four directions, you shall obtain that wealth by serving the divine. And then it was written on the 9th, 2 days before he was hanged. Signed, the lowest of all the Sangat, Mewa Singh, and even that humbleness and dignity at his end, that signed the lowest of all the Sangat, Mewa Singh. He doesn't see himself as any sort of hero, or even some great heroic martyr. He just sees, I am just an ordinary human being. I am the lowest of the low. I deserve no almost celebration other than just celebrate my death because I will be back. And again, this is 2 days, knowing he was going to be hanged in 2 days' time, the courage to write that sort of letter. Don't mourn me, celebrate me, and continue the great work of the Sikh community. So again, we have to pay tribute to this guy, and this actually is the press release that was prior to his execution, his sentencing. It was this guy W.C. Hopkinson who was killed, and it was described as a Hindu. I think this is just the ignorance of the journalist at the time didn't realise he was a Sikh. And it says at the bottom. Well, I won't read it anyway. It doesn't actually sort of give too much information, but that is actually the snippet from the newspaper at the time. So there you go. It's once again a great celebration of a Shaheed who we do pay tribute to once again. And well done to that gentleman who met his end and has obviously come back to us probably several times since, as is the Sikhi way. So let's now move on to my next story. And Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, he has made a call to remove the Indian tricolour from the Indian High Commission on the 26th of January. And I'm going to play you. This is. I'll just quickly play you the video of Gurpatwant making this call now. Okay, so I'll put that on the background because half it is in Punjabi. What he's basically saying is saying that Trump's approach to Iran, the way he's standing against Iran, ignites the Sikhs for Justice call to remove the Tiranga from the Indian embassies on our day, as he calls it, Republic Day, across Five Eyes countries. So what he's actually shown in this video here, this is a video that sort of went right, certainly across the news streams here in the UK, and I guess in many European and American countries. There was a guy outside the Iranian embassy who climbed up and tore down the Iranian flag. And again, it's a very symbolic gesture. So what he said, look, he's citing President Trump's support for Iranian revolutionaries who have torn down that flag outside the Iranian embassy in London. SFJ is now issuing a call to remove the Indian Tiranga from Indian embassies on the 26th of January, India's Republic Day, across all Five Eyes countries, including Italy, Germany, Portugal, UK, etc. Now, he said in his video message that it justifies the removal of the Tiranga, stating that Trump's backing of Iranian revolutionaries affirms a universal truth. Tearing down a terror regime's flag is an act of liberation. Parallel to Iran stands the terror regime of Modi's India, he says, under which Sikhs have faced genocide, iconocide and now ethnic cleansing, rooted in religious persecution and political oppression. Now, he says that that we need, or that protesters need to stand outside the High Commission and remove this tricolour on Republic Day. He calls for the replacement of the Indian Tiranga with Khalistan flags. And he specifically mentions Melbourne, Auckland, London, Milan, Washington, DC, San Francisco, Toronto, Ottawa and Vancouver. So great, absolutely. What I would say on this is be careful, because of course it does immediately spring to my mind Avtar Singh Kandar here in the UK. Now, Avtar Singh Kandar, was it 2 years ago now? Well, actually 3 years ago now it will be. Gosh, that doesn't time fly. Avtar Singh Kandar, a Khalistan activist and campaigner, he did this very thing. He climbed up. No, I beg your pardon. I'm wrong. He didn't. He was accused. There's a huge difference here. And this is the note of warning. Avtar Singh Kandar was accused of, during a protest outside the Indian High Commission, he was accused of climbing up the Indian High Commission and removing the Indian tricolour, the Indian flag from the High Commission. Now, the pictures of an individual doing that went across Indian media. It was shown across Indian media. And it ignited an absolute storm. I'm just going to show that picture again. Here we go. So you can see, this is the video of this guy removing. But this is very reminiscent of Avtar Singh Kandar, who did exactly the same thing, removing the Indian flag. Again, it wasn't Avtar Singh Kandar, but pictures of an individual doing this very thing outside the Indian High Commission. As a result of that, Indian media spread all sorts of hate across their mainstream media, and they named Avtar Singh Kandar as doing this. And again, it's a very symbolic, very provocative gesture to do something like this. As a result, just shortly after, again across the Godi media, there were calls for the elimination of Khalistani campaigners. Lots of names were mentioned, amongst which was Avtar Singh Kandar, who was wrongly accused of being that individual to remove the Indian flag. Shortly after that, he died under very, very suspicious circumstances. Basically, it was 2 days after Hardeep Singh Nijjar, after the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar by Indian forces. Avtar Singh Kandar died suddenly of supposedly natural causes, acute myeloid leukemia. But in reality, he was in perfect health up until suddenly he was admitted to intensive care in a hospital here in the UK, died 2 or 3 days later. So he went from perfectly good health to suddenly dying of acute myeloid leukemia, a serious cancer that apparently just suddenly magically appeared. As many accusations have gone around. Of course, it was raw. It was Indian intelligence agents who had somehow infected him with some toxin that brought about this. There was no toxicology reports. There has been no proper investigation into his death, and this is why his family's lawyer, his family's barrister, a guy called Michael Polak, is acting to demand a judicial review, a judge-led judicial review into Avtar Singh Kandar's death, to find out the truth. Was he murdered by the Indian state, because of course many people believe, certainly in the context of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, certainly in the context of Gurpatwant Singh Pannu's attempted assassination, that Avatar Singh Kandar was murdered by the Indian state. So I'm saying all that just to say to you guys, if you're going to remove flags, please be very, very careful doing so. Please make sure you wear a balaclava, something to fully cover your face so that you cannot be identified. Because we do know the Indian state clearly is quite prepared to murder people for doing this very act. So if you're out there following Gurpatwant Singh Pannu's appeal to remove the Indian tricolour, and by all means, please do it. But if you do, please do make sure you are anonymous. Please make sure you cannot be identified by Indian forces. By all means, peacefully protest democratically as you're allowed to in all these nations. But for heaven's sake, please hide your faces. And it's sad that we have to do this, but this is what we have to face with Indian threats from the Indian state, that the Indian intelligence will identify you and they will quite possibly take ultimate action against you. So be warned. But ultimately, we are here to protest and to highlight these acts and actions of the Indian state. Okay, let's move on now to happier stories, and let's finish. Oh, this is the penultimate story. This is this just hit the headlines last night. This is Ashpal Kaur Bogal. She is the first Sikh Britain female, female to ever be selected to represent England women's hockey at an international level. So she has achieved a huge thing to get selected by the England team. She's now playing for England, the England national team at international level. So no more to say other than well done to her. Hockey is a hugely important game for the Sikh community. Because of course sport is a very, very important part of the Sikh faith. It's the modern equivalent of the military prowess, the military success of the Sikh people in centuries past has now evolved into a much more peaceful but no less competitive sphere, and that is of course of sport. And this is where Sikhs excel in so many areas, whether it's boxing. Certainly here in the UK, Sikhs are hugely successful boxers, unsurprisingly, but across many other sports. We do know even the Indian Olympics team, the Indian team, is made up of several Sikhs, again, from the Punjab, who, again, have this extraordinary prowess at particularly hockey. And so this lady, Ashpal Kaur Bogal, well done to her, because, again, she's broken into the England team, the England national team, as the first British Sikh female. So again, there's always barriers for women in sport. It's always very hard. It's much harder for women to succeed in sport because they're up against essentially these all sorts of cultural barriers. First of all, being female, and secondly, being a Sikh. So of course, again, huge cultural barriers that she's managed to break through. So well done to Ashpal. That's absolutely fantastic news, and good luck to her in her international career. And likewise, we will follow her career with interest. So good luck to you in your future career. And then we're going to finish off now with a bit of an editorial. And this actually is how India. We've talked quite a lot recently about Trump and what's going on in North America, and how Trump is potentially looking at the. Let me remove that. There you go. How Trump is looking at the whole Khalistan concept, the whole idea, the whole premise of Khalistan. It carries with it a huge amount of potential to suit American interests. Now, understandably, unsurprisingly, India are waking up to this fact. They are becoming a little bit more aware of, yikes, it looks like the Western nations are waking up to the concept of Khalistan. And they're starting to think, you know what, actually this could work for the West. We like this idea. And I think this has got India a bit scared, because now we're seeing just subtle signs and pointers to the fact that India is having to rethink its whole strategy because it knows it's losing the war. We've always reported, certainly over the last year or more, that it's losing the propaganda war. It is losing the information war, despite having this huge army of people online churning out anti-Khalistan, anti-Sikh propaganda, pro-Modi propaganda, pro-BJP, pro-RSS, etc. It's launched this massive information war or misinformation war to support its interests, but it's losing because, sadly, it's up against the internet. the vastness of the internet. Domestically in India, it's easy. It's an easy win for RAW and NIA and the Indian government because they are preaching to an audience that they have full control over. They control the complete narrative in India. You cannot come up with a counter narrative in India to hold the government to account, to fight, to reveal the truth about anything, because if you do, you find yourself shut down and silenced very, very quickly through instruments of law or instruments of lawfare, as we call it, or literally through simple brute force, violence and intimidation and harassment. Speak to any journalist in Kashmir if you need to know the truth about that. So ultimately, they know they're losing the war. They're losing the information war. So they're having to rethink their whole strategy, particularly in areas where they actually don't have the dominance and narrative control like they do in India. So in this year, it does look like the Research and Analysis Wing, the RAW, the main Indian intelligence agency, alongside the National Investigation Agency, the NIA, they are reportedly undergoing what they're calling the most significant structural transformation since its actual founding, the RAW's actual founding in 1968. Now, this it's been described as a silent pivot. What that basically means is we're secretly changing our plans. So this silent pivot is this direct response to this pressure that they're now feeling that's coming from both Washington, from the Trump administration, and north of the border in Ottawa, in Canada. And particularly, it's after they were caught trying to assassinate Gurpreet Singh Pannoon, and of course the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. So that basically they've been caught red-handed. They know they were caught murdering Hardeep Singh Nijjar. That court case is still going on. They've been caught absolutely, utterly, embarrassingly red-handed, trying to launch the assassination of Gurpreet Singh Pannoon. It doesn't get more clumsy than being caught trying to hire an assassin when that assassin is actually an agent of the US law enforcement. So again, you can see how clumsy and almost amateurish RAW have been found to be. So they've realised we need to rethink the whole strategy here. So Delhi has realised that these sort of old world methods of covert action, which once operated under a set of, I suppose you could call it unwritten gentlemen's agreements. This reflects the Cold War between Russia and the West. There was always these unwritten agreements, gentlemen's agreements, as they were called. There aren't written rules about this, but there were always ways of understanding the way things worked, and those sort of unwritten rules allowed agents, secret agents, to operate. Certainly in the Cold War between Russia and the West, to go about their business with understanding of how each side would operate, which sort of helped things get done. But these sort of the rules that they sort of believed were in place between India and the West, they don't really stand. And the trouble is, Indian intelligence has been in the past so clumsy and amateurish that the West just, obviously it respects it for the capabilities it is capable of, but it realises it is not a match. It is no match for the former KGB, now the FSB. So they sort of treat it with almost sort of arm's length. And India realises this and realises that its old methods just aren't working anymore. It does need to sort of rethink how it goes about it. So, what it said, this silent pivot, as it's called, they're changing from an idea, a concept of having boots on the ground to what it calls digital deniability. So, once the new leader, Secretary Parag Jain, he took the helm of RAW in July last year. So once Parag Jain took control, RAW, he's changed RAW's direction of travel. He's moving it away from physical operations in North America and more towards a bit more of a sophisticated, technology-driven approach. So this has included various strategies. It includes what it calls the shuttering of North American stations. So for the first time in over 50 years, India's been forced to operate without a formal station head in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. As you remember last year, we reported that they'd basically essentially been kicked out. So after the expulsion of these senior officers in 2024 and last year, the agency has opted not to replace them with traditional diplomatic cover officers. Because don't forget, remember, a lot of these operations were launched through their consulates and their diplomatic infrastructure. So instead, RAW is shifting its North American hub to non-aligned territories, possibly operating through third-party nations in Southeast Asia or even the Middle East to avoid direct friction with the FBI and CSIS. So what it's saying is saying instead of using our obvious fronts like almost every other nation uses its consulates and its embassies, its consular infrastructure to launch its intelligence operations. They are the hub of intelligence operations in various countries. India said, look, we can't do that. It's too obvious. We're just getting caught too many times. So they're being a bit more subtle about it. They're now using third-party countries. We don't know specifically who yet, but we do know that their direction is to try and tie up alliances with other nations saying, would you mind awfully if we use your infrastructure, your consular infrastructure to launch our operations? So again, you can start to see this sort of this complete change in tactic. Also, the rise of cyber-centric intelligence. Now, this year is seeing a restructuring that's focusing on information warfare rather than actual boots on the ground. In other words, having operatives actually operating in North America and certainly in Europe. So it's going online, it's going digital, it's going virtual rather than real. It's looking at this, what it calls Bharat Pol integration. Now, RAW is working more closely with the newly empowered National Investigation Agency, NIA, and what it calls this Bharat Pol network. And this allows India to use legal and digital trails like financial tracking and social media forensics to try and neutralise Khalistan-related threats. And that is done without having a single agent step foot on US soil, because clearly it struggles against the CIA and FBI. It struggles against CSIS. Whenever it sends agents out there to do their jobs, they're getting caught, they're getting surveilled, they're being seen. In other words, they're just not good enough. So they're saying, okay, let's take it from the ground, let's make it all digital, online, virtual. Let's start trying to neutralise the Khalistan threat digitally, online, which of course it has been doing unsuccessfully so far, but it's now putting a lot more resources into doing this. Also, AI-driven surveillance. Now, a significant amount of money and resources have been diverted now to field allowances to high-end AI mission systems. Now, these systems are designed to monitor what it calls secessionist nodes, basically Khalistan groups of Khalistan campaigners in the UK, Canada and the US, remotely, identifying funding conduits, in other words, where the money's coming from. Where is the money coming from and being resourced into these pro-Khalistan networks? And can they shut these down via international banking regulations? In other words, they're now focusing on the funding model of the Khalistan movement. How can we close it down? How can we stop channels like satellites, for example, being funded? How can we close these channels down? Not by direct action, but by indirect, more behind-the-scenes action. Let's cut off their funding. So again, you can see how sinister this is. Also, what it calls diplomatic delinking. Now, RAW and particularly the RSS are now consciously delinking its intelligence operations is from its diplomatic missions. And again, this comes back to what I was saying earlier. Historically, RAW operated under the cover of consular affairs. So this year, it's reportedly moving towards what it calls a deep cover model. So this is where intelligence gatherers have no official connection to the Indian government. So again, the operatives are not going to be clearly identified RAW operatives or NIA operatives. They're going to be individuals who have no obvious connection to the Indian government or to Indian intelligence. These are going to be recruited proxy agents, effectively, so that if they're caught, again, there's no link back to the Indian government. And by this, look at Gurpratap Singh Pannoon, where you had all those separate layers, those fire breaks that created this plausible deniability back to the Indian government. So the Indian government says, no, nothing to do with us. He's just a criminal. The fact that India hired him is a different matter. So it does provide this, what they call this plausible deniability. And this is a critical necessity given Trump's theme for using intelligence blunders as huge leverage to get trade concessions, etc., out of India. So they're adopting this strategic defensive wait and watch idea. So the current directive for RAW in North America is one of strategic defense action. The agency has been told to halt all offensive covert actions. No more high-risk physical operations that can be intercepted by Western agencies. In other words, we keep getting caught, so let's just stop doing that. Focus on penetration, not neutralization. In other words, let's move back to good old-fashioned spycraft. of gathering information on how the US state is interacting with Khalistani leaders like Gurpatan Singh Panoon, for example, and counterintelligence, heighten internal vetting to ensure that US or Canadian intelligence hasn't turned Indian assets during the recent diplomatic chaos. In other words, can we trust our own agents anymore? We need to be a little bit more careful in our vetting process so that Western intelligence can't turn these agents to make them, instead of acting for India anymore, they're now acting for Western. They become double agents, basically. So the goal in 2026 isn't to win a street fight in Vancouver or New York. A security source said the goal is to ensure that the US cannot use our own intelligence operations as a reason to sanction our economy or demand a discount on our strategic interests. In other words, we need a rethink because we keep getting caught. We're just not good enough. We need to adopt new tactics so that we can actually try and start winning this war against Western intelligence instead of losing it. So there you go. It is basically, this restructuring of law is for India's interests. It's a painful but necessary change, a necessary evolution. India is seeking to maintain its status as a BRICS leader and a global power, but it can't afford anymore to keep getting hit by this backblast of amateurish covert actions. They need to professionalise. They need to digitise its external wing. India is now preparing for a long-term shadow war with the Khalistan movement, one where the battlefield is a computer server, not a suburban street. There you go. Interesting stuff. So we'll see. It's been its success story in 2024, 2025, 2023 even, has been pretty poor. Yes, it succeeded physically. It's managed to assassinate various members of the Khalistan movement. But the price they've paid for that has been huge. The fact now that the world, the Western mainstream, is talking about India, not in a good way, in a bad way. The RSS, Hindutva, has been laid bare. People are now waking up to the threat of the RSS and Hindutva. That is really not a position they would ideally be in. So there you go. Right, let's move on to comment section. The clock's counting down now. So let's move on to our comments. Thank you to all of you once again for all your lovely comments, as always. TC, one of our regulars. Hi, TC. Thanks for starting us off today. You talk about, this was the podcast. I did 2 podcasts last week with Dr. Grell. One of them was the attacks on the Christian community. Again, another community being targeted by these Hindutva extremists in India. There were attacks, dreadful attacks over Christmas in Manipur and other areas against the Christian minorities up there. And TC says, look, it's all about ideological supremacy. Ironically, this comment refers to Hindutva, but it equally applies to the New Zealand extremists. Ideological supremacy is just farcical, one that prays that the Almighty shows these misguided individuals the true path to the one universal God. These stupid, deluded man-made constructs are the cause of the political misery, crime and hate that we see in Kali Yuga. Live and let live. Let's look after all mankind. We're all created by one God. It doesn't matter how you dress or what they look like. I couldn't say it better, TC. We're all human beings. We're all equal and under the eyes of God. Whether you call him Allah, you call him God, you call him Waheguru, ultimately we will all find out one way or the other who's right. And I think those white supremacists shouting Jesus, Jesus, I think those guys are up for a rude awakening. Who knows? But I think they're up for a rude awakening when they pass on to meet their very own maker. AS Tier says, the world is only now seeing the real face of the Azad Hindu. India, the Union, will be tested beyond its capability in order to resolve the situation. I think the key there is India will be tested beyond its capability. I think it doesn't have the capability to keep India together much longer. I believe the forces are strengthening now to break, fragment, balkanize that artificial construct that is India. And ultimately, I think you're right, AS Tier, that India is going to be tested, and I think it will fail that test quite spectacularly. And Khalistan, amongst other Republican nations of India, will appear as a positive result of that. Satnam Khalsa says, hopefully Mr. Trump will have a word with them. I think anybody who comes in the crosshairs of Mr. Trump now is quaking in their boots and probably looking out the window waiting for any sort of missile or Delta Force helicopter appearing on their horizon. You certainly don't want to cross Mr. Trump when he's in one of these sorts of moods. So, Dharm Jai Hind, thank you for this comment. This is a lovely comment. you refer actually back to the podcast I did some weeks ago with Layla, where, the question was if Khalistan is a diaspora-only movement. And I explained why Khalistan isn't a diaspora-only movement. It is very much alive and well in the Punjab, and that is why India is so terrified of it. Thank you. I answered beautifully, apparently. I'm delighted. I'm glad you appreciated my answer. But you provide some much more interesting context. Thank you for this. The main reason in the Punjab is, of course, you refer back to the terrible times of extrajudicial murders and torture in the 1980s and 1990s. Over 150,000 Sikhs were murdered by the Indian state. They were tortured before they were killed. It has no parallel in contemporary history. Women were raped inside police stations. People are actually scared due to that. Second, if you're a businessman, this is a bit more insidious. Now, in the Punjab, if you support the idea of Khalistan, the income tax department will raid your offices. You can't do business. If you have a government job and you support Khalistan, the government will dismiss you from the job. If you're working at a private company, your employer will terminate you because the government deliberately creates obstacles for that company if you employ a Khalistani. So that's why you see less activity here in Punjab. But deep down their heart, everybody loves the very idea of Khalistan. This again just gives you an idea. When our critics say, well, there's no support for Khalistan in the Punjab. Yes, there is. The reason that you probably haven't heard about it is because they've had to keep their heads down because of dangerous, undemocratic, almost Nazi methodology here. That if they identify you as a Khalistani, the state, the Indian government will make life very, very hard for you. And anybody that helps you, and again, this is so reminiscent of Nazi ideology, is that the state will do everything in its power to damage you, to get you, and anybody who helps you will suffer the same fate. And you only need to think back to the Second World War in Germany and the lead up in the 1930s to the start of the Second World War, that if you were a Jew or you helped a Jew, what happened to you? Exactly these sorts of things. So again, it's Nazi ideology in its form. So the message out there to any of the critics who don't believe that the Khalistan movement is alive and well in Punjab, you are very, very wrong. It's just waiting for that moment. And this is, again, it was expressed in the Lok Sabha elections last year. If you have any doubt, look at the overwhelming support for pro-Khalistan candidates. When people were allowed to show public support for a pro-Khalistan candidate, look what happened. They came out in their hundreds of thousands. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So just you wait as the message. Thank you, Dharm Jai Hind. I did send that to Layla. She came back overnight to actually say thank you very much. Delighted to read your comments. So thank you for that. Bobby Singh. And thank you for this link. This is a fascinating one. I might actually, again, do a story on this. The video that you linked to, this is Prakash Raj. He's an Indian. I'm not aware of his work, but he's quite a well-known Indian actor. But he also he made a speech, a 10-minute, 12-minute speech about what's happening in India. Again, this very thing we've just been talking about, actually. He highlights how the minorities are being persecuted. He specifically highlights the RSS. It's actually a fascinating watch. Very brave guy to actually stand up and said what he said, and particularly in the context of what we know about the Indian state. I think I will do a separate story on that one. Thank you, Bobby, for bringing that one up. As I said, it's actually a very interesting story. Stay safe. Again, we talk a lot about the intelligence agencies and what's been going on. We talked just now about RAW. But what Stay Safe is highlighting the fact is this link between the RAW and the FSB, the Russian intelligence service. And we do know the FSB succeeded the KGB, the old Cold War KGB in Moscow, the Russian intelligence agency. We do know that RAW works very closely with the FSB, particularly when it's targeting internationally Khalistani campaigners. FSB is a very, very effective force. It's been around for a very, very long time. It is very good at what it does. The West has a deep respect for the FSB, obviously post-Cold War, etc. They're very good at what they do. I've got a lot of respect for the FSB. They are very, very good, very experienced agents. So that, of course, if they're working with RAW, it's a very deep concern to the West. As Stacey says, it's likely that RAW has already infiltrated the West with its agents. I don't know, actually. Bear in mind what I've just been talking about. They've tried, and yeah, there probably are agents. We certainly know the RSS has its network right across the West. Ultimately, RAW, though, has had, I would say, not a great success in this. But when it's piggybacking, when it's aligning and using FSB resources, that is when it's a lot more dangerous, because the FSB is effective. So if the FSB is lending its skills, even its operatives, to RAW, we need to take note of that. That is actually an area of big concern. And then finally, Suk Chain Bath. Thank you. Well, thanks us for all our participants and team members. Thank you. I did see several comments from you, Suk Chain Bat. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for your appreciation. And likewise, Voice of the Punjab. And I said we certainly have Punjab viewers, and we need more Punjabi viewers for all the reasons that are pretty obvious. We need more of you in the Punjab to see this show, to hear the truth, to hear a counter narrative. Everything that you see and hear on the Godi media is not really very truthful. It comes with a narrative. It comes with a deep agenda. You need to hear the truth. You need to hear what's really happening out there in the world, what's really happening there in India and certainly in the Punjab. And know that you are not alone. Know that there are hugely powerful forces, outside India and outside the Punjab that are working for you and with you to promote not just the Sikh people, not just the overall people of Punjab, but the whole concept of Khalistan, to try and bring you guys freedom from this oppression, this persecution from Delhi, and to actually give you guys the genuine freedom of democracy, the freedom of the rule of law, the freedom away from lawfare, these laws that are used against you to try and silence you, freedom from this oppression of your businesses, your economies, your economics, etc., that we've just been talking about. Ultimately, we need more people in Punjab to know that you are not alone and feel that there are friends out here in the West who are very much fighting on your behalf to deliver that freedom. And as Gurjant Singh finishes off today, Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed, Khalistan Zindabad. That is what it's all about. That is what we will bring, hopefully, all of us fighting together, campaigning for this wonderful concept of Khalistan, a free and wonderful Sikh sovereign nation of Khalistan. And on that note, we're going to bring things to a close once again. Thanks so much for watching. Do keep your comments coming in. Thank you for all these comments. There have been some really, really interesting comments. Thank you for all the links to great videos. Several of you have emailed. Thank you to each and one of you who've emailed stuff, which is, of course, very interesting. If I get time, I will do stories on many of those things that you've sent through. Thank you. Do keep the emails coming through. Don't forget you can message me. This comes to me directly, message@satlogetv.com. Or just leave a comment in below the videos with anything you'd like to bring to my attention. Thanks so much for all your supportive comments. I do read them all. We all read them all. They're very much appreciated. But do keep them coming and do spread the word. Get out there. If you want to sponsor the channel, if you know a company that might be interested in sponsoring the channel, please let me know. If you want to get involved, if you want to appear on Perspectives with me, I'd be delighted to have a bit of banter with somebody, to even discuss some of these topics. Get your perspective. Let me know. Send me a message. But that is it for another day. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your loyalty. It's all very much appreciated. That you have, of course, been watching Perspectives. I will see you next time.